stand together, we'll never fall.
Well, hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the All Around Growth podcast. Standing together is exactly what we are doing today here on the homestead. More on that in a second. My name is Rob Kaiser, and I am your host. Welcome back to the show. Today is Tuesday, September 27th, 2022. This is episode number 430 of a show where we co-create life together, of a show where we stand together so that indeed we never fall. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about a collaborative effort that is taking place here on the homestead to make all of this work. We've got two vehicles down right now. The vehicle that I planned to take to the Tremont Farmers Market, which I discussed yesterday briefly in the Farmers Market recap, just alluded to today, that vehicle is down. So that leaves one truck remaining. That is my truck. Because it is a long bed, very high up, we generally don't use that truck. It's more difficult to load. It's more difficult to navigate. It's just not the most conducive for market, but Dad's truck, something's going on with it. Lost oil pressure last night, or at least the gauges seem to be non-functional while the oil remains. So we will see. That truck is in the shop. He's got my truck right now picking up produce. No lapse in production. But speaking of produce, that brings us to the topic of today's show, which is, well, how long do you ferment this produce? Right? We make fermented foods here on the farm and homestead. I'll link to what we're doing, York Meadow Farm, in the show notes so you can learn more. But in terms of the ferments that we make, we're oftentimes asked a lot at market, well, how long does this stuff ferment? And I figured that that would make a good topic for today's show because that was a question that we were asked this weekend. It's undoubtedly a question that I will be asked today. So let's talk about that. How long do you let your food ferment? First of all, I'm going to reference 3 books here today. These are 3 books that have been paramount to our experiences here making fermented foods over the last few years. And one book in particular has been paramount to my experience with fermented foods dating back to, oh, I don't know. I suppose I started making or experimenting with ferments about 20 years ago. And here we are. That book is Nourishing Traditions. My dad had a copy of that book in the kitchen as well. Apparently he's been looking at that also. The second book that he uses regularly and is inspired by is Wild Fermentation by Sandor Katz. Nourishing Traditions is written by Sally Fallon. And the book that we oftentimes reference the most is a book called Fermented Vegetables, Creative Recipes for Fermenting. 64 vegetables and herbs in kimchis, krauts, brined pickles, chutneys, relishes, and pastes by Kristen K. Shockey and Christopher Shockey. This is a good book. And if ferments are your thing, then I think this is probably the one book that's worth having on hand in your kitchen. So in terms of ferments and how long we let the ferments sit, we're going to talk about sauerkrauts today. So, like basic sauerkraut, cabbage and salt, or any kind of sauerkraut variant, anything with cabbage basically, okay? So whether that's got carrots, onions, radishes, what you know, however you make your ferments, as long as there's a healthy amount of cabbage in there, then this is going to be applicable. And even if you don't have any cabbage, chances are there's going to be a lot in here that's applicable as well. Fermenting is weird science, and there's a lot to it. But there's basic steps for making sauerkraut. And while this episode is going to be largely dedicated to how long it takes for the ferments to work, it's worth covering some of the basic steps in making sauerkraut as well. Okay, so you want to rinse your vegetables in cool water and prepare them according to the directions of whatever recipe you're making, okay? So initially add half the salt with your hands, massaging it in. You know, you want to be able to taste the salt, but it shouldn't be overwhelming. And this is for new fermenters if you're not following a standard recipe, right? You want to be able to taste the salt, but like I said, it shouldn't be overwhelming. You want it, if it's not salty enough for you, continue adding salt in small amounts and tasting it. It's important to taste your ferments as you're making them because, you know, think about it like this. Think about it like a haircut. You can't put it on once it's already been cut off. You can't take the salt out once you've already added it in there, but you can always add more salt. So as you're adding the salt and as you're massaging it in there, the vegetables, primarily the cabbage, is going to quickly look wet and kind of limp. All right, and some liquid in whatever you're mixing it in, whether it's a bowl or what, a big, you know, dish, you're going to see some liquid in the bottom of that. So, and that's fine. Once you've done this, once you've mixed it all up, just let it sit for a few minutes, covered, 15 minutes, half hour, whatever. It's going to make things easier when you're packing it in your vessel. And when I say vessel, you can use a mason jar, you can use a crock, you can use basically anything you've got laying around. But when you stick them in that vessel, you want to press those down with your fist or some kind of a tamper like a wooden pounder. And what that does is it packs the vegetables down. It releases even more of that brine that began to be released when you were massaging them and scrunching that stuff up with your hands. You're also breaking down the cell walls, which helps release some of that moisture that's contained within the vegetable material. So once you've packed it down there, you're going to see some visible brine on top. And that's good. You want to see that. And basically, if you're packing in a mason jar or whatever it is, you want to leave some space in there because your vegetables are going to continue to form a brine. So much like canning, you kind of want to leave some headspace in there. And if you've got that thing packed full, you want to make sure you pack it or place it on a dish or something in the case that it overflows. Okay, so there you go. You've made some sauerkraut. You've made some fermented stuff. So how long do you let it sit? Well, the reality is it depends. It depends on what vegetables you use. It depends on the recipe you followed. It depends on the results you're going for. It depends on the temperature of the location where your ferment sits while it goes through the fermentation process. It depends on a lot of things. So just to make things easier, because like I said, I'm no expert. I'm just somebody who's been doing this, as a hobby on and off for a while, and then has been doing it, dare I say, professionally for a few months now. So according to the Shockey book, Fermented Vegetables, I will read the waiting period with you, and then we'll read another section, possibly knowing when it's done, or at least a few bullet points there. So the waiting period reads as follows. How long you'll have to wait depends. A very small batch of kraut will be ready much sooner than a larger batch in a crock. If you're making a small batch, watch it carefully, keep it pressed down under the brine, and taste it soon. It is these small batches that often get novice fermentistas into trouble. Since it is widely believed that kraut needs to sit for a week or 3, the unsuspecting fermentista can easily let a batch spoil because small batches are difficult to keep weighted under the brine. In warm weather, a small batch might be ready in as little as 3 days. Large crock sizes can take 3 weeks to a month or more. Warmer incubation space and vegetables with a higher sugar content are often more active and require that you watch them a little more carefully to make sure everything stays submerged. Generally, these are ready sooner. Remember, this is a live food exhibiting its terroir, or sense of place, climate, and season. This means that even when you follow the exact same procedure, your ferments will be different each time. This is the beauty and excitement of the art. Now there's another section called Knowing When It's Done that goes on and talks about certain things to consider, like taste, obviously, and acidity level. And in a nutshell, anything below a pH of 4, 4.5 is kind of where you want to be. It wasn't until we started making ferments for sale where we actually started testing pH. When you do things commercially, you've got to have certain measures and protocols in place and documented, and the process and the routine is important to follow, not just for safety protocols and inspection purposes, but it's important to follow for the consistency's sake, so you can get as much of a consistent product as possible. Because like we just read, that even when you follow the exact same procedure, your ferments are going to be different each time. So there's a lot of variables in fermenting, and in terms of how long we let it sit, it really depends on how much volume you're dealing with, right? For example, if you've got a small mason jar, that might only take a few days or a week. If you're fermenting in a 2-gallon can, okay, so here's, excuse me, one thing I'll do too is I'll link to something in the show notes, because I think that this is kind of critical. This is a helpful component that had I known about this and how effective it was, I'd have purchased this a lot sooner. Okay, we're all familiar with the mason jar weights, right? Well, we want to, pound our vegetables, compact our vegetables in that mason jar, and drop a little weight in there to keep those things submerged under the brine. And that's good. But a lot of times, if you've experimented with ferments on this scale, you will notice that sometimes they junk out, they trash out because that top gets dry and then the whole thing just molds out and it's done. What the heck? All right. You know, some people say just cover it up, weight it, you know, put cheesecloth on it. Other people swear by airlocks. You can do what you want to do because there is no right or wrong way. However, there are certain ways that, well, I've even seen people hollow out logs that were in a forest fire and create a natural ferment weighted with a stone in order to have that hollowed out log pass on some of that smoky flavor. And no way, I mean, outside of just a rock and some extra vegetable matter and some things tied on there, you know, that was the vessel. You can do anything that you want. But there's a product out there by Ball, and they are these stainless steel springs. And without a doubt, in my humble opinion, these things are the best. Leave your headspace in a jar, you know, a few inches. And these things come with lids too that kind of serve as an integrated airlock for mason jars up to a half a gallon. These are optimal. And what's nice is, should you scale up and decide that you want to go larger than this half gallon ferment, well, what do you use? You know, one thing that you can use is a 2 gallon or 8 quart Cambro container. It has a nice fitting snap lock lid. You have the ability to drill out and install an airlock in that if you wish. We have done that, but more often than not, we find the pressure of the lid and this spring combined with a small plate that serves as a follower, or our weight, if you will, and some sort of, you know, depending on how much material we've got in that 8 quart crock or Cambro container, depending on how much material, we'll weight it down with a plate. We may put a little piece of Tupperware on top of that, and then the spring on top of that, and then close it with the lid. The seal is tight enough to keep everything pressed down and keep the vegetables underneath the brine, but it's also not that tight where the gas that and everything that is released from the fermentation process cannot escape. Therefore, the airlock really isn't necessary, and the seal is tight enough to keep out the nasties. Right? So that's a very effective way to begin scaling up, and doing so consistently. When you're doing all of this, sanitation is important. There's a number of different ways to sanitize. I don't think any one way is better than the other. And, you know, we just use a simple bleach solution that we make. It's like a 0.39%. We just mix it with filtered water, give everything a rinse, and then let it air dry. There are sanitizing wipes that you can buy. There's some special Sani rinses. Those of you who brew beer, make wine, know all about sanitizing, because that is fermentation as well. But this, with food, it's a little different. There's not necessarily any thing that we're trying to keep clean because of strains that were introduced or are being introduced. Everything that's here is natural, and like we just read about, there's that natural terroir that the vegetables take on when they do their fermenting thing. Okay, so now that we've got some idea of, real quick, back to these Cambro containers. That's great for up to, about 2 gallons, 8 quarts of, no. That'll take it right to the top. You want to leave at least a 2 to 3 inches or more of headspace with this. I would suggest at least 2, because depending on what you're packing, especially if it's something like beets, again, sugar content in beets is high. It will be active. It will produce a lot of brine. It will overflow. And if you're not careful, like have that thing resting on a pie plate, which the 8-quart Cambro fits perfectly on, and the volume of brine that is produced never really seems to exceed or overflow a pie plate. It's almost like things were designed to fit in that way. I think these things are a great thing to have in your kitchen. They're reusable, they last forever, and they're great. So I'll link to those in the show notes as well. What's also nice too is, should you decide to go further, generally speaking, food grade buckets, 5-gallon buckets, are regularly easy to come by. We've got a source around here where we can buy them for $2. They are used ice cream containers, I guess, and we buy them, we wash them, we sanitize them, and they work perfectly for what we do. And we then buy lids to fit on that, and then we do use airlocks on our 5-gallon containers. But at the end of the day, we are still using, why am I talking about the Cambros? Let's forget about the 5-gallon containers for now. It's highly unlikely that many of you guys are going to be, wanting to do 5-gallon containers. However, if you've got a big garden and you want to do some ferments on a big scale, this is a great way to do it. 5-gallon container buckets, food grade buckets. We use this ball stainless steel spring on everything. 8-quart Cambros, 5-gallon containers. We use plates of varying sizes. Okay, just with regard to the followers, the weights that you use, if you're using plates, you want to keep your plates simple, not a whole lot of designs on them, and make sure that they're clean. If they become scratched or broken or chipped, don't use that plate anymore. That will, the broken enamel where the ceramic or whatever material the plate is made out of, when that is exposed, that can absorb and harness the nasties, the bacteria that we don't want. So generally just a simple white, 10.5-inch dinner plate will fit a 5-gallon bucket perfectly. A smaller 6-inch plate, like a salad plate or whatever, works well in these Cambros. We have a number of different smaller plates. There are several that work well. Find something that works for you and just stick with it. It's real simple. Plates are readily available in thrift stores on the cheap, and coffee mugs are another great way, instead of a piece of Tupperware in there, to place on top of the plate and then set your spring on top of that before sealing the vessel. Regardless of what size we're using, whether we're doing smaller 2-gallon experiment batches or 5-gallon production batches, or even now I'm starting to do experiments in 5 gallons because why not? We use these ball springs in everything. I think this is just a fantastic product, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So anyways, guys, so when is the ferment ready? Just to wrap things up, first of all, it's ready by the look of it. Your vegetables become somewhat translucent, and the color of, kind of what they looked like when it's cooked, kind of like cooked cabbage. It's got a little bit more yellow than green to it. The smell is going to have that traditional sour smell. It's going to be firm to soft, but not really slimy. If you're If your ferments have a slime to it, then there's something off. And the taste is going to be pleasantly sour and kind of pickly, tangy, but it's not going to have that acidity of vinegar. So, you know, you can, when you're first starting out, you can test your ferments to see how they taste as you're actively, you know, working through them. But just keep in mind that the more times you open it up to test it, the more you expose it to the nasties. And my recommendation is just keep trying. If you've had failures in the past, don't let that keep you down. Check out these stainless steel ball fermentation springs and lids. You can even buy them as a pack with the jar. I think that this is a great way to start. And even if you've fermented before, I think this is a great way to kind of level up your fermentation game in order to get some increased consistency and better results over time. So ultimately, according to the Shockies, they think the best answer to the question of how long do you ferment and when is my kraut done is when it tastes great. So guys, that's it for today. Like I said, Dad's out running, picking up some veggies today. I'm gonna get into the kitchen after I get this uploaded, get prepped for the market later this afternoon. I look forward to sharing that with you in the next Farmers Market update next week, the Farmers Market recap. And tomorrow, I think we're gonna touch on something farm and construction related because it's my brother's birthday and I wanna celebrate a lot of the work that he has contributed here on the Farm and Homestead. So stay tuned for that. You guys have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. This is Rob Kaiser, and thank you.
If I can help somebody, then I want to try. People may think that it's odd that I believe in friendship and love. And truth is always the best way to the world that may seem odd. I'm an odd fellow. I'm an odd fellow. I'm an odd fellow. If we stand together, we'll never fall. We can make a difference and answer the call. And know the times are wasting every day, and we can help somebody along the way. People may think that it's odd that I believe in friendship and love. Truth is always the best way to the world that may seem odd. I'm an odd fellow. You're an